Everyone tells you about the money. Save enough, plan the pension, talk to a financial advisor. Nobody tells you about the Tuesday that comes 8 months later. The one where you wake up and there's nowhere to be, and no one needs you there, and for the first time in maybe 40 years, the day has no shape at all. That's the part nobody warns you about, not because it's a secret, but because almost nobody talks about it until they're already standing inside it. Today, we're going to talk about what actually happens psychologically in the years after retirement, the parts that surprise almost everyone, in almost exactly the same way. And by the end, I think you'll understand something that would have been useful to know a long time before that Tuesday ever arrived. Retirement gets talked about like a finish line. Work 40, 50 years, and then finally, rest. And in a lot of ways, that's true. It is an arrival. But psychologists who study this transition closely have found something the finish line metaphor completely misses. Retirement isn't simply an ending. It's one of the biggest psychological transitions a person goes through in their entire life, right up there with getting married or becoming a parent. And like most major transitions, it doesn't go the way people expect, not because something goes wrong, because almost nobody is told in advance what the actual shape of it looks like. So let's walk through it properly. Not the financial side, the psychological one, the side that decides whether these years feel like freedom or feel like something else entirely. Chapter 1. The honeymoon that nobody expects to end. Let me tell you about a man named Frank. Frank retired from a manufacturing plant after 38 years. The first few months were, in his words, the best of my life. He slept in. He traveled with his wife. He finally fixed up the garage he'd been meaning to fix for a decade. Every day felt like a long overdue vacation. Around month 7, something shifted. Frank couldn't quite name it at first. The trip started to feel repetitive. The garage was finished and there was nothing left to fix. He found himself watching more television than he intended to, not because he enjoyed it, but because there was, quite simply, nothing else pulling at his attention. He described it to his daughter this way: "It's strange. I have everything I said I wanted, and I feel worse than I did the year before I retired." Frank wasn't broken. He wasn't ungrateful. He had walked, without knowing it, straight into one of the most well-documented patterns in retirement psychology. Chapter 2. The 4 stages almost nobody is warned about. A gerontologist named Robert Ashley spent much of his career studying exactly what Frank experienced, and he mapped it into stages that show up with remarkable consistency across almost everyone who retires. The first stage, Ashley called the honeymoon phase. This is Frank's first 7 months, the sleeping in, the traveling, the long postponed projects. It feels genuinely like freedom. And for a while, it is. But Ashley found that the honeymoon phase almost always gives way to a second stage, one he called disenchantment. This is the part nobody warns you about. The novelty wears off. The freedom that felt so exciting starts to feel, strangely, a little hollow. Some people describe it as boredom. Others describe something closer to a quiet depression or a sense of having lost their footing without understanding why. Here's the important part. Ashley's research found this isn't a sign that something has gone wrong with you. It's an almost universal pattern. The excitement of no structure gives way, for nearly everyone, to the discomfort of no structure. Freedom, it turns out, is only enjoyable for a while, when it isn't attached to anything. Chapter 3. Why the dip happens. Here's a piece worth understanding because it explains why the dip lands so hard for so many people. For decades, most of your days had something psychologists call imposed structure. A schedule you didn't build yourself, but that quietly organized your entire life around it. Wake at a certain time. Be somewhere by a certain hour. Complete tasks that had deadlines attached to them, whether you loved the work or not. Psychiatrist Eric Berne, known for his work on how people structure their time, observed that human beings rely heavily on external structure to organize not just their days, but their sense of purpose. Most of us never realize how much of our identity was quietly borrowed from that structure until the structure disappears all at once. Frank didn't miss the manufacturing plant. He missed, without realizing it, the shape the plant had given his days for 38 years. When that shape vanished, nothing had yet replaced it. And a life with no shape, no matter how comfortable, tends to start feeling strange fairly quickly. Chapter 4. The Part That Surprises Marriages. Here's a chapter of this that almost nobody talks about publicly, though nearly every retired couple recognizes it instantly. Let me tell you about Carol and Ed. Carol had been retired for 2 years by the time Ed joined her. She'd built a full, quiet rhythm to her days, her garden, her book club, her own private schedule. When Ed retired, he assumed they'd simply merge into that rhythm together. Instead, within a few months, Carol found herself, to her own surprise, deeply irritated. Ed was home constantly. He'd comment on how she loaded the dishwasher. He'd ask what the plan for the day was every single day, as though she were now responsible for structuring his time as well as her own. Carol later admitted, half laughing, half serious, "I loved him for 40 years. I did not know I would need this much space from him." Chapter 5. Why this happens to nearly every couple. This pattern is so common that Japanese researchers studying it decades ago gave it a specific name, retired husband syndrome, describing a documented rise in stress and even health complaints among wives, specifically after their husbands retired. The mechanism isn't really about love or compatibility. It's simpler and stranger than that. For decades, most couples build a rhythm around separation. Hours apart during the workday create natural space, and that space, paradoxically, often protects the relationship. When retirement removes that separation all at once, couples are sometimes together for more hours in a single week than they've been in decades, and nobody warned them that adjustment period would need to happen at all. Carol and Ed didn't have a marriage problem. They had a spacing problem, and once they understood that, the solution wasn't more togetherness. It was Ed finding his own version of Carol's garden, something that was entirely, separately, his. Chapter 6. The third thing nobody warns you about. There's a third layer to this that deserves its own attention, and it's quieter than the first two, but often the hardest to name. Her name was Grace. She'd spent 30 years as a nurse. When she retired, the loss she hadn't anticipated wasn't structure, and it wasn't her marriage. It was something closer to invisibility. For 30 years, dozens of people every single day needed Grace, relied on her, recognized her competence in an emergency, and almost overnight, that need simply stopped. She wasn't unhappy exactly. She described it as feeling like she'd become slightly transparent, present, but no longer necessary to anyone's day. Chapter 7. Why being needed matters more than we admit. Psychologists studying identity across the lifespan have long pointed to something called role identity. The idea that a significant part of how we understand ourselves comes from the roles other people rely on us to fill. Nurse, provider, the person who always knows what to do in a crisis. When a role like that ends abruptly, it isn't just the activity that disappears. It's a piece of the internal answer to the question, "Who am I?" that quietly goes with it. Grace's experience wasn't a character flaw or an inability to relax. It was the very real psychological cost of losing a role that had defined her invisibly for 3 decades. And like Frank's dip and Carol and Ed's spacing problem, it was never really a sign that something was wrong. It was a sign that something significant had ended and nothing had yet been built to stand in its place. Chapter 8. What actually comes next? Here's where all 3 of these stories land somewhere worth knowing, because Ashley's research didn't stop at disenchantment. He identified 2 more stages that follow it for the people who move through it well. After disenchantment comes reorientation, the stage where a person begins, often through some trial and error, rebuilding a version of structure and purpose on their own terms, rather than the terms a job once handed them. And after that comes stability, a settled, sustainable rhythm that, in Ashley's research, often reports higher life satisfaction than the working years that came before it. Frank eventually found his way there. Not through one dramatic decision, but through several small ones. He joined a community garden. He started volunteering 1 morning a week at a trade school, teaching apprentices the exact skills he'd spent 38 years mastering. The structure came back, but this time he'd built it himself, out of things he'd actually chosen. Carol and Ed found their version too. Separate hobbies. A standing rule that mornings were for individual time, afternoons for shared time. The marriage didn't need less love, it needed more room. And Grace eventually found hers at a free clinic 2 mornings a week where 30 years of nursing experience were, once again, exactly what someone needed. Chapter 9. What this means. If you're standing in the dip right now, if you're somewhere in the middle of this right now, the honeymoon behind you, the reorientation not yet built, I want to say clearly, this is not a personal failure. This is, according to decades of research, one of the most predictable transitions a person goes through. The dip is not the end of the story. Ashley's own research is fairly clear on this point. The stages that follow disenchantment tend to bring some of the highest satisfaction levels people report across their entire lives. But reorientation rarely arrives on its own. It gets built deliberately, the way Frank built his garden and Grace built her Tuesday mornings at the clinic. It usually starts small. One small structure, one small role that still needs you. One small thing that gives a shapeless week its shape back. So if you're standing in the version of that Tuesday I described at the start, the one with nowhere to be and no shape to the day, I want you to hear this clearly. That feeling was never a verdict on your retirement. It was simply the disenchantment phase, right on schedule, exactly where decades of research says it tends to show up. What comes after it, for the people who give themselves permission to slowly rebuild, tends to be some of the richest, most satisfying years of an entire life. Not because the structure returns exactly as it was, because this time you get to choose what fills it. I'd like to know, if you're retired, which of these 3, Frank's honeymoon dip, Carol and Ed's spacing problem, or Grace's quiet loss of being needed, hit closest to your own experience? And if you found your way through it, what did you build to replace it? Tell me in the comments. Someone reading right in the middle of their own dip may need exactly that answer today.